Welcome to the Rational Nationalist. If you found yourself stranded in a jungle, what's the first thing you'd do? You'd organize yourselves because the you in the previous sentence is plural. You are a group. For now, you're just a ragtag, not really even an association, just a bunch of people, but you want to eat and you don't know these people and you don't want them or anyone else to eat you, so you figure you ought to work together. Some people object, but they go their separate way, or you eat them first or whatever, but eventually you get everyone to agree to cooperate. You agree that you need some boundaries. Somebody has to enforce the rules, right? But before anyone can enforce the rules, somebody has to make the rules, and you come up with a process for doing this, including appointing officers with specific roles. How well do you think your primitive society would fare? Would you prosper or perish? If you answered, you're probably wrong because you have nowhere near enough information to make an assessment. You don't know what type of people I've given you, and it makes a difference if you've got a jungle full of monks or a jungle full of murderers. Assuming, however, that overall you have a representative sample of the baseline of humanity, how far you get depends on the type of ethos that develops, right? If people consider this new society worth contributing to, then it will flourish. But if everyone just wants to sit around smoking jungle leaves and drinking coconut milk all day, that sounds pretty awesome too, but you probably won't get very far. We talk a lot about how systems create incentives, and the current manner in which citizenship is conceived in the Anglosphere and the West in general means that we are sowing the seeds of our own destruction by incentivizing freeloading. Citizenship, in its current form, is all about the rights and benefits of the citizens and says nothing of their duties or responsibilities. However, rights without duties produce a society of dependents unable to defend themselves, consuming resources that nobody replenishes. Citizenship requires both protection from arbitrary power and an obligation to maintain and protect the common good. Go back to that primitive society. We mentioned that you drew up rules of governing, but we never said anything about what they would entail. However, pretend that in the list we've decided, in addition to the mechanisms, to enshrine some of the basic principles to guide our new society. We understand that in order for our society to prosper, everyone's going to have to chip in, so we've created a basic list of duties, like a Bill of Rights, but for duty. A Bill of Duties. A duty bill, if you will. This sounds reasonable, right? We don't want a society of freeloaders in which everyone sits around all day posting things on the internet and playing video games. I mean, I guess that's the dream, but before we get to that, a lot of people are going to have to do a lot of work, so our articles of governance includes basic duties or contributions that everyone must make. That's it. There is no give and take. You must contribute whatever, and it's usually either labor or military service, and are guaranteed nothing in return. This document says nothing about what the government must provide, what the government can or cannot do, or anything about the rights of its citizens. They must give service, and in exchange are promised nothing. What do you think about this system? It's actually a pretty reasonable ask. After all, you aren't getting nothing per se. Presumably you are getting security and predictability. Sure, the government might come and take your whole crop, but nobody but the government is going to unless they want to mess with the ruling party. In the same way that the mafia provided protection in Italian immigrant neighborhoods where police enforcement was corrupt or unreliable, The same principle applies to governments. We saw this in post-Saddam Iraq or post-Gaddafi Libya, where as bad as those leaders were, the power vacuum they left was worse, or at least you could make that argument. The core principle is that a monopoly of force, and it doesn't have to be a legal monopoly like you see with governments or post-Westphalian sovereigns. It just takes an imbalance of power so severe that nobody would reasonably challenge the hegemon. That's the way most primitive societies, even up to advanced monarchies, function. One person, party, or body accumulates power to the point that nobody can challenge them. The really funny, ironic thing is that this works pretty well even when the hegemon is not in any way, shape, or form benevolent, concerned with the common good, or interested in anyone's welfare but their own. Simply having a big bully on the street often serves the common good. In this case, I'm referring to the general welfare, or the ability of innocent people to live their lives unharmed and profitably as the common good. Go back to the street gang analogy. Pretend we're in a street gang and we'll BOG with it, so we're basically the original gangsters, a medieval lord and his retinue. And we're Vikings or whatever, so we just show up in a new land seeking our riches. What do? At first we might just raid and plunder, and sure, that's fun for a while, but we're limited to what other people have already produced, which isn't much because everything they make immediately gets stolen, so why would they produce anything? Now, we're thugs, but we're smart thugs, right? We're also immortal here, so we're going to keep playing the long game. We need to keep ourselves teeming to the brim with women and wine for ever. If we just take it, we might be good for a while, but we want people alive and producing more for us. This isn't a protection racket per se. We're not offering anything in return. It's just straight up give it to us or we'll take everything type of extortion. Some people with an especially large amount, we might just kill and take everything anyway. Why not? We can do whatever we want, but we also know that dead people aren't going to keep making nice stuff for us. So we want people alive and producing, even if it's just periodically so that we can go out and raid them. But you notice what happens. Simply having a big mean thug in the vicinity provides a degree of stability. Sure, people might have to hide their wives, hide their kids, and hide their possessions when we go out on the prowl, but the other 23 hours a day, they're in the clear. Why? Think about what would happen if somebody nearby got robbed. Sure, we might think it's funny when we first hear about it if it's just one sucker getting robbed. We're clearly not nice people. But more than a couple get robbed and we're going to want to do something about it. After all, that's the stuff we should be stealing. If you're a street gang or any criminal organization, you're probably making your money selling drugs, prostitutes, whatever. You probably don't want muggers or street criminals in your area scaring away your customers. In this way, even predatory powers produce a stability that is often preferable to the chaos of a power vacuum. Now, how does all this relate back to our primitive society? The entire point of organizing in the first place was to create this big dog, so to speak. The duties we lay forth are what people must contribute to ensure that our government, or the entity we've agreed to create, is the most powerful entity in the area. Because everyone in the area will benefit from the presence of this monopoly of force, or metaphorical big dog, it's not unreasonable to ask them to contribute upkeep either through labor or taxation. Still, demanding free labor while promising nothing in return. That sounds a lot like serfdom or, dare I say, slavery, doesn't it? As with most things, it's a matter of degree, and what is or is not reasonable is a matter of perspective. Something akin to paying taxes or even a draft is one thing, but the other extreme is indeed slavery, so there's obviously a middle ground to be found. That's a discussion for another day. For now, just know that a conception of citizenry that involves duties but offers no rights is the pathway for a society of slaves. What about the inverse? A society that offers its citizens rights but demands no duty in return. That is suspiciously close to the status quo, but let's work through our hypothetical from the ground up. Instead of duties, we decide that all members of our society should have certain things guaranteed. Certain rights. We'll start simple, building from the base up of Maslow's hierarchy with food, shelter, and security. Simple, right? Now let's add another wrinkle just for the hell of it. Pretend this society has a genie. Having 3 wishes, they ask for food, shelter, and security to be met indefinitely. Now everyone has their basic needs met and doesn't have to worry about anything. If they do nothing, they will be fed, clothed, and kept alive, but nothing else. Beyond these basic rights, you're on your own. How do you think this society would fare? At first, they'd absolutely flourish. With their basic needs met, people are free to pursue the arts, science, and technology. Civilization flourishes and takes off. Sure, a lot of people will do nothing, but those who don't do anything can simply live their lives off the genie and not have to worry too much. After all, they are entitled to food, shelter, and security merely by existing in our society. How would they fare without the genie to rely on? About as well as the post-purge society in Rick and Morty. If everyone is guaranteed food, shelter, and security, then a lot of people will simply freeload off the system. They sit around all day, and when the time comes, they simply go to the rest of society and say, hey, you owe me food, shelter, security, whatever. By establishing positive rights, you are establishing a freeloader problem. By contrast, negative rights cost next to nothing. I don't have to pay anything not to suppress your freedom of speech, for example, as I might have to pay to provide you housing when you refuse to make your own in our primitive jungle society, in which we've agreed to a system of governance that guarantees you housing. Notice that society doesn't automatically collapse. Some people will work regardless. Depending on how bad the freeloader problem, this might not even be a major concern in our primitive society. After all, this is how most primitive societies, clans of extended families, operated. Do you think that they'd left Grandpa out in the snow just because he was too decrepit to build his own shelter? In some cases, yeah, but not as a general rule. However, here the incentive to help is clear. It's emotions. You help Grandpa out not because he is entitled to food, shelter, and so on, but because he's Grandpa and you love him. Even in family clans, though, you always have that first-class loser of a cousin who does nothing and just rides on the fact that he knows the family won't abandon him. Okay, so I've talked in enough circles that even I've lost track of the topic, so let's restate the thesis as clearly as possible. For society to function, citizenship must include a duty to provide for the common good as well as rights. At least for society to function indefinitely. As we've seen, society can keep functioning for some time after the citizenry loses its sense of duty, but the clock starts ticking when the civic capital starts to decline. Let's move on to a case study. The Roman Republic compared to the Roman Empire. The Roman Republic started when they expelled the tyrant Tarquin the Proud and was founded on principles of common rule. For those who don't know the story, Tarquin's son had raped a noble woman, Lucretia, who then killed herself and demanded her death be avenged, sparking a rebellion against the monarchy. After their success, they established a republic, a system of shared rules with well-established rights and privileges, especially for the patricians. Like most political systems, if not all, this one was largely defined by opposition. That is, it was structured largely by what they were trying not to be, which was an absolute dictatorship. It was at least somewhat ad hoc, with its final form being heavily influenced by the immediate problems it was trying to solve, which was giving absolute power to one person to do as they please, including rape, torture, and murder their citizens. As you'll see, this kind of comes full circle when you get to the empire. Remember, the whole thing started because proud King Tarquin's son coveted some noble woman, and the king was powerful enough that he thought he could take her without consequence. I mean, they got overthrown for it, so I guess there was some consequences in this case, but there wouldn't have been within the existing system. Within the existing system, he could have raped most anyone else's daughter without consequence, but he picked the daughter of an influential noble woman, and now that it was their daughter getting raped, they cared enough to act. As such, the rebellion was really little more than a self-defense pact among the nobility to protect them from a common threat, an abusive government run by a tyrannical king. This is basically what the Republic, and in a sense all republics, are. A coalition of citizens providing for the common good. For this reason, the Romans in the Republican era had a sense of duty and were willing to sacrifice for the common good. It's also worth noting that the Roman Republic was defined largely by negative rights. The Republic guaranteed primarily things like legal protections based on status, representation, and so forth. In exchange for basic protections of citizenship, the Roman citizens were willing to fight and defend their nation. And at the beginning, they had to be. If they weren't, they would have fallen to the mercy of the Samnites, the Greeks, or the Carthaginians, and whatever system they chose to impose. The deal to all Romans was clear. In exchange for the basic protection of rights, they would work towards the prosperity of the Republic and the glory of Rome. Furthermore, because only negative rights were guaranteed, there was little cost to expanding citizenship to newly conquered people, giving them stake in the preservation of the social order at little to no free rider cost. Citizenship, and its accompanying rights, became an effective carrot as Rome expanded its reach. Eventually, we all know what happened. The Roman Republic collapsed into the Roman Empire, which eventually fell to both internal rot and external division. Instead of conquering others, the Romans fought among themselves. Instead of a coalition of free citizens working together for the common good, it became a nest of backstabbing and self-advancement, with various factions all looking out for themselves. What changed? The people. Starting with an intense rivalry between Marius and Sulla, not unlike the current one between Trump and Obama that's defined the past decade of our own republic, Romans divided themselves into factions based on personal loyalty. Instead of a duty to the common good, the precedent was set that everyone would look out for their own interests. It would only be a half-century between the civil war between Marius and Sulla and the replacement of the Republic with the Empire. Now, the Empire didn't collapse overnight. In fact, when a good ruler managed to take the reins, there were long periods of prosperity before its total collapse. However, the writing was on the wall. By exchanging a sustainable republican system that divided power among its citizens with one that depended solely on the whims of one man, the emperor, they wrote the ticket for their own demise. The causes of this were complex and numerous, but it started with civil society losing its sense of duty to the common good. The collapse of the Roman Empire started with its people. The political class took advantage of this, to be sure, but the Roman people's willingness to embrace tyrants for short-term, personal, or sectarian gain is ultimately what allowed people like Marius, Sulla, and Caesar to destroy the Republic. Perhaps the Romans simply became too successful for their own good. It's worth noting that by the time the Republic collapsed into the Empire, Rome faced no real existential threats, and by the time they did, it was too late. With no common enemies, it's not entirely surprising that Romans started fighting among themselves to divide the spoils. It should also be noted that the switch in emphasis between negative and positive rights, and to hypothesize a potential correlation between these rights and general societal health. After all, during the Roman Republic, Roman citizenship was largely defined by negative rights, such as the right not to be seized, tortured, and murdered at the whims of a ruler, or rights such as self-determination through the political process. Imperial Romans, by contrast, gladly gave up those rights for positive rights, namely bread and circuses. However, these positive rights came at a price. As the emperors provided more and more material benefits to the populace, they simultaneously eroded their legal protections and other negative rights. One has to wonder whether this willingness to accept things like bread and circuses in exchange for basic legal protections, such as the freedom to organize, assemble, or speak freely, is what led to the destruction of Rome. In other words, negative rights seemed to be correlated with national strength for the Romans, whereas positive rights from the government make people weak, dependent, and under the thumb of the government. Either way, a nation is at its strongest when its concept of citizenship includes both rights and duties. Duties without rights create slaves. Rights without duties create dependence. A healthy society requires a conception of citizenship that entails both rights and duties to protect and prioritize the common good. Thank you for joining us on The Rational Nationalist. I've been your host, Lee Ellis, signing off.